Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Villain Viber podcast. My name is Ashley, and today I have with me...
Oh?
And...
Shaun.
So Shaun is our very special guest, and he is the third placer from our most recent season, Season 8, Deathcast Calling. Also, my favorite. Literally got the award for my favorite. So this is a very, 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 very special episode. Sheep Gang Rise Up, if I do say so myself. So we have a jam-packed interview for you all today. It is going to be very exciting. We're all very excited to be here, and I think we should just jump right into it. So, start off, Shaun, I asked the same question to everyone. Can you just give us an overview of your game? You can be as thorough or as vague as you'd like.
Just like round by round, go through it?
Sure, if that's how you want to set it up, yeah.
Okay, so I guess I'll just start. Like, in the pre-merge, I was mostly just like trying to lay low and not like disrupt too many people, because like on the original burrow, although I did sort of connect with like Zap and L, I knew I was like on the bottom. Like, we didn't end up going to tribal and burrows, but I knew that if we were going to go, that like Sushi would have been the first boot just because he was inactive, but then like I would have gone after because I really didn't connect with like Ricey or Ava very much. So I sort of knew from that I wasn't going to be like controlling anything, so I knew I needed to like lay low. And that's sort of what I did throughout the rest of the pre-merge. Like, I think I only went to 2 more tribals after that. And like the first one, the Ricey vote, I pretty much just listened to like what other people told me to do because I didn't feel like rocking the boat or anything. And then the tribal I went to right before the merge, obviously, that was the one where I got 2 votes from Alex and Peanut. And at that point, I also didn't try to like push my agenda too much. I did want the 5 of us that weren't Alex and Peanut to split the votes between Peanut and Alex in case of Alex having like a third idol, because he was like the idol god this season. But yeah. And then when merge hit, I feel like the beginning of merge was the very best point in my game, because I had allies from the what I called the duolition in my confessionals, which were the duos of Zap and Izzy, Tig and L, and Ginger and Gold. And I also had allies with the Singles Club Alliance with myself, the other Shaun, and Malachi, as well as I was sort of close with Lisa and Chris, even though I thought I was close with Lisa. Lisa was obviously didn't agree with that and said so very openly later on. But so I had sort of bonds with a lot of people, and like at the beginning of merge, during the Chris vote, I was getting information from the duos. Like, I was the only one who wasn't a duo who was getting the information from the duos about the vote being on Chris. And like, I actually tried to make a move that tribal by pushing for Alex. Like, I was trying to get, let's see, who was it? It was Malachi, Shaun, Chris, Lisa, myself, and Elle to all vote Alex to take him out in the plurality, because I knew that Alex was someone I couldn't work with, but Chris was someone I did want to work with. So that happened, but that didn't end up happening because like Tig and Elle decided to back out at the last second. But then throughout the next couple votes, like the Ginger vote, I voted with the singles, and I didn't expect to vote with Zap and Izzy, but I coincidentally voted with them anyway when they flipped on Ginger. And like the Alex vote, I just voted with the majority. And then obviously, I know this is probably going to be, you're probably going to ask a lot of questions about this later on, but the final 10 tribal, I sort of blew up my whole game. Like, I wasn't really sure what I was thinking when that was going on. Like, I was emotional and tired, and I didn't want to be perceived as a goat, but then I just sort of blew up my game, and from that point on, like from there until like the final 6, I just was sort of slowly losing like control. Like I could feel any chances I had sort of slipping away. And then like right after the final 6 rocks, because I really thought I was going home in that at that tribal, like I was very certain that either Gold or Malachi would flip. Like I was shocked that they actually went to rocks for me there. Like after that, I had like a breath of hope again when it was like, oh, it's the final 5. I actually have a good chance of making the final 3. And then I had like a really long conversation with Izzy, and we got really close, which prompted me to make the other really dumb decision I made this game, which was to keep Izzy at 5, and then that ultimately set in motion the votes at 4 and 3, which ultimately led to my demise right before the final tribal council. So that's just sort of an overview of my game.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, you explained that very, very well. And what's interesting is like with Malachi, I only say this because like we interviewed him last night, and so it's fresh on my mind. Like with his overview, like it revealed a lot of things that we didn't know, but with you, like this is exactly like the game that I watched, and it's like I think that's like certainly not a bad thing. It's because like that's how you played. You know, you wore your game on your sleeve, and I think that was really unique and really admirable in a way. And especially the fact that you made it all the way to third doing so, like that is just wow. But moving on from that, you know, we did warn people that this was a twist heavy season right in the ad. We let you know up front. We let you know in the interview, like that was a heads up. So what did you think of all the twists of this season? You know, like if you want to go in like through each twist, like that would be nice, but you don't have to. You can give an overview. And then also like, what did you think about the safari? Maybe what did you think of the advantages? Just those things.
Okay, so for the twists, I guess the first twist would be like the weird tribal format where it was like the 4 losing duos who went to tribal. And for that, I sort of just approached that how I would approach just like being on a new tribe. Like I talked to people and just went through tribal normally. But it also sort of gave me more confidence that very first tribal I went to make that move on Siphicon, because I knew that like that I was sort of overplaying at that vote, but I also knew that like that configuration of people wasn't going to go to tribal again. So I knew that even if I like burned bridges with Chip, like that might not immediately come back to haunt me. So I like that twist. I mean, it benefited me because the boroughs never went to tribal council, and I didn't have any real power on the boroughs. So then I guess the next twist was the swaps. And the swaps were just sort of overwhelming for me because I am not a great social player, and the situations where I do well socially are when I don't have a ton of conversations to like keep going. So on those first couple swaps, like especially the first one where there's 11 people, like I don't even think I DM'd gold a single time on that tribe just because I was so overwhelmed with the amount of people that were there, and we were only, because of the live challenge, we were only on that tribe for 1 day. So I think the swaps made it more difficult for me to connect with people because you sort of had to like, if you were meeting them for the first time, you had like 1 or 2 days to like talk to them, and then boom, suddenly it was over and you wouldn't see them again for another week. Like that was what happened with Alex. Like in particular, we talked once about like the tribal I'd just been to, and then we didn't talk again until the final 15 because we kept on getting swapped away from each other, and by that point we basically were never able to like work together again. So yeah, the swaps definitely made it more socially challenging, but I also thought that they made the strategy a lot more dynamic, like big moves like the Ricey and the Logan votes being made so early. I don't know if that would have happened on a season without the swaps. So I was grateful for the amount of dynamic gameplay they brought, because I feel like if the cycle had continued of picking off the more inactive people, I would not have made the merge. So I think they allowed bigger moves to be made earlier or incentivize them. So that was a benefit for me. But yeah, that's most of what I have to say about the swaps. And then for the advantages, I would I know some people have said that they didn't really look in the Safari. I searched in the Safari every single episode, but I still was not able to find anything, mostly because I wasn't comparing information with people, except maybe L and Zap a couple times, because I didn't really realize that was a thing, and I think that was sort of an indication of my weaker social game. Like, hearing after the season right off the bat that, like, within the first couple episodes, there was already all this information spreading about, like, Ricey's friendship idol, like, that spreading across boroughs. I was like, "Oh, I didn't know any of that." I was just like, "Oh, let's look in this garbage can and this thing and whatever." I was just, like, searching through the Safari randomly, but I feel like the advantages were unique this season, which was it was good for someone who didn't have them, for them to have drawbacks because it wasn't as overpowered to face them, but I didn't really get to experience them too much because I didn't find anything, and none of my allies really found anything at the time that they could use, like, at the time that I was aligned with them, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, definitely makes sense. Um, you know, the next question kind of touches a bit on like the duo twist. And so do you feel like your duo was a good fit? And like how did having a duo impact your play style?
I thought he was a pretty decent fit, like, we were, the 2 youngest people in the cast, and I got along pretty well with him. Like, I definitely did talk more early on with, like, Zap and L than I did with him, but I felt like he was someone that I could count on even if we didn't have, like, the most engaging conversations, like, and then at that first tribal we went to, I felt like we worked really well together because I felt like we sort of, like, each bonded with people. Like, I was able to bond with, like, Lo I formed a bond with Logan pretty quickly, although I guess everyone formed a bond with Logan because Logan was, like,
Right.
super social. I thought I got Logan onto my side, but I mean, I guess I sort of did, but he had a relationship with Lisa from their borough, and he was also, like, involved in making sure Chip and Siphicon had no idea that Siphicon's name was out. Like, there was this convoluted plan at the final 23 for Moth God to pretend to throw my name to other Shaun, so that Chip and Siphicon would think that other Shaun would think it was me and not Sushi because they thought it was Sushi. Just explaining it makes you realize how convoluted it was, but we were doing a lot of strategy together, and then I was really sad when he got voted out at the very next tribal, especially because there wasn't really anything I could do about it. I think this is kind of funny. At the beginning of the round, he was like, "Oh, I told my tribe thinks they all that I simp for this like VTuber like," and I'm like leaning into the joke, and I'm like, "Oh, it seems like you're having fun on the tribe." Like, I was like, "Oh, that's fun. I think he's doing well." And then he messaged me like 5 hours later, like, "Oh no, they're all gonna vote for me. Please help me. Please like tell your teammates to tell their duos to help me." And I was like, "Oh no, what have you done? Like, I thought you were a good player. How did you get yourself into this situation?" But then I actually did talk to Izzy on because I was closest to Zap on the other tribe, so I talked to Izzy to be like, "Oh, hey, can you talk to Zap and see if there's any way she can get the vote off of Moth God?" But basically, Zap was just there was no way that was happening because he wasn't DMing people in the tribe. I was like, why can't I have a more competent duo? Like, no offense, Moth God, you were great, but like, why? I don't know. I was just sad to lose him so early because I felt like it would have been nice to have someone to like compare info with from other tribes and just a guaranteed ally I can count on, which for a lot of the rest of pre-merge I really didn't have. So I was sad to lose him. But overall, I liked the twist and what it brought to the season. Just not so much specifically how I my misfortune with losing my duo.
Okay. And I like missed it, like your answer to this, but like, do you feel like the duo like impacted your play style, or like specifically, like, or like maybe I should phrase this differently, like how would you have played differently without a duo?
I mean, without it, I didn't have a duo for that long,
You're right.
but
Yeah, that's true.
I think the way that it impacted my play style was that I was able to, I sort of, is that like at the merge, because I was, even though I was working with everyone who was a duo, because I wasn't a duo, I think I was trying to like set up a narrative, which I mean it was already true, but I was trying to reinforce it as much as possible. Of like, oh, it's the duos versus the singles, and we need to get the big bad duos because they're like running the game. And it was easier to say that when I didn't have a duo partner. Like I think the way that it impacted my game was sort of the duos versus singles alliance lines and how I was sort of like in the middle of that. But having whether or not I had Moth God, I don't think really would have changed anything. Like I would have basically played the same for the first 3 rounds.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, do you think that if Muscat had survived further into the game, that you would have been able to work well together?
I think we would have. Were I think we would have it would have been in our best interest to work together. Like I remember from yesterday, Malik, I was like, "Oh, I hated Joey," or not I hated Joey, but he was like, "It wasn't in my best interest to work with him. I wanted to vote him out." But for me and Mothgod, it wasn't. I feel like he wasn't like my ride or die, like how close Zap and Izzy were. Like I wasn't gonna like go to the end with him and like ruin my chances at winning. But it wasn't like we weren't ever going to be that close. But I think we would have been. It would have been a guaranteed allyship that I could count on, and yeah, like I feel like him being around would have maybe sort of changed who I aligned with because I don't think he was that inclined to work with like the people from the duolition. Like he might have leaned more toward the other side. I mean, I'm not really sure because he went out so early, but I think I would have had I would I'm really not sure how I would have played with him. But I think I would have had more of like a foundation of an alliance as opposed to like me having to like run to or choose between like different already existing alliances. Like there would have been more like I could have had more agency having Moth God around, if that makes sense.
That's such an interesting answer. Yeah, it's so interesting how like everyone that we've interviewed so far has had like varying answers, like in how like the duo twist has like impacted their game. You know, it's like each person has had a different journey, and I don't know. I think that's just really interesting. Speaking of journeys, you started the game as someone who was a bit timid, a bit shy. So I'm curious, like what was it like playing on such a large stage in front of such a large audience? And how did you go through this transformation over time to become like this firecracker that you ended up at the end of the game?
I mean, I think a large part of the reason why I came off so like shy and timid at the beginning was because I joined that VC with like there were a bunch of hosts and like Ricey and Zap, and that just I had left a lot of confessionals about that. But I think I was nervous because this is by far the largest org I've played in. Like the others have been like 80 to like 150 people in the server. Like this was definitely a larger stage. So I did sort of feel pressure, a little more pressure, like I knew that more people were going to be like analyzing and talking about what I did. So I needed to be prepared for that, which yeah. But in what was the question again? Sorry, I got kind of sidetracked.
You're okay. The question was, what was it like playing on such a large stage in front of such a large audience, which you just pretty much answered? And then how did you transform over time into like this firecracker?
I think my transformation was because I started out like I think it was sort of the specific group of people that I started out with. Like our borough had a lot of like big personalities that I didn't get along with too well. Ricey was a huge personality and we just didn't click. He's cool, but we just didn't mesh too well, and I just sort of felt intimidated by just like the vibe of our tribe, if that makes sense. Like not as much the particular people on it, but sort of the vibe of it. But as we got sort of going into the flow of the game, I was able to shift more into game mode and like I sort of shook off the intimidation and I wasn't really thinking about that. I was just thinking about the game that I needed to play. And when I had my more firecracker moments, it was when I was like specifically the final 10 tribal, it's a very emotional time and I was like not thinking super clearly. But I guess I just got more confident because I knew that what I was doing was working. I mean, I I a lot of the times I thought I was doing better than I was, but I at least thought I was doing well, so that was sort of a positive feedback loop and that I was doing well and sort of getting benefits from doing well, so I just got more and more confident throughout the game.
Okay. Yeah. That absolutely makes sense. It's like once you get so committed to something and like really wrapped up in it and you feel like you're doing well at it, it makes sense that you would um like feel that way. I don't know exactly like the words that I'm looking for, but like everything that you're saying makes sense is what I'm getting at. So I love in general that you got to have that kind of transformation and that journey and it that you just got to experience that and that we got to witness it from you because it really was. I mentioned it on the post season podcast. I don't know if you listened to that one, but how it was like one of the best like character arcs that we've ever seen in Villain Viber. And it's like it just was. And it was phenomenal. And it'll like go down in Villain Viber history. So that's something that's cool, I guess. So the next question is one that I asked Malachi, and it is, what was your strategy going into the game, and can you compare and contrast it with how you actually played?
I think my strategy going into the game was like it was sort of influenced by the games I'd played before, where the game I had finished most recently was one where I was like really out there as a threat and like I got deemed as a threat at the start of the merge and I wasn't really able to shake off that threat level. So coming in, I sort of knew I wanted to play like a more under the radar middle playing game, but I also knew that this was going to be like because it's such a big server with such like great casting, I knew I was going to be like one of the players who was less skilled, or maybe not necessarily less skilled, but less like social and less competent in some ways. So I knew coming in that I wasn't my game plan was just sort of to lay low. And I actually, like, when I started playing the game, I was like, this is going fine, but I think I'm probably going to go pre-merge. And then I think my strategy shifted once I got, like, closer to merge. Like, oh, I'm actually doing this. Like, that was, like, probably around Final 16, Final 15 is when I started getting more confident and started deviating from my strategy of just, like, laying low and stuff. And I tried to make more moves around that point. But overall, compared to how I wanted to play going in, I think I would say I played pretty similarly. Like I wanted to like try to play the middle, which I did, but I shouldn't have been so open about it, which is definitely like I I feel like I didn't really realize how bad that was for me while it was happening. Like I obviously going back and reading all the stuff, it's like, oh, everyone's like saying how stupid of a move that was. But I wasn't really aware of it at the time. I was just like, oh, of course I've been playing the middle. Like people should have been able to figure that out. But they should still think I'm with them because like I'm loyal and I haven't voted against them ever. But that was I was sort of misguided there. But I think it might have actually been better for me to stick to how I was thinking about things before the game started, like how I should have perceived myself like as not that big of a player, and or rather someone who wasn't going to be like a massive threat and have the ability to like claim that I'm playing the middle and still like have tons of bonds. I think I overestimated myself toward the like final 10 to final 8 around that point, and that sort of lowered my chances. So that wasn't great, but I think overall I still played pretty similarly to how I thought I was going to. Like I didn't think I was going to be this massive threat, someone like Zap or Izzy this season who was like always on the chopping block. Like I know that I didn't want to play that type of game and I didn't play like that, but yeah.
Well, you kind of did towards the end, right? Like your name kept getting brought up.
I mean, my name wasn't getting up because like, oh, if Shaun gets to the end, he's gonna win. It was, I feel like it was more like, oh, none of us can trust him, and like at the final 6, it was like, oh, for Gold Malachi and the other Shaun, they were like, oh, we can take out Shaun and go to the final 3 together. I don't think they were like super intimidated by me
Okay.
and being like, I wasn't. My name was getting brought up because of like bad things I did, but they weren't like good things. Like they weren't like, oh, I made these big moves and now people want me out. It was like, oh, I did these stupid things and now people want me out, but it's also not boosting my resume. So I wasn't, yeah, I didn't play big enough to get targeted. I just played badly enough to get targeted, which, yeah.
Don't say that. Like I don't think you like played badly, you know? Like I mean, did you like make mistakes? Like sure, but like who didn't? Even Izzy made mistakes.
I
Sorry.
mean, I feel like I just made too many mistakes, like too often from from the final 11 onward. Like I said, like I think Izzy was the first person I told that I was playing the middle, like I said in a DM. And at that point I just wasn't really thinking about it, like, oh, that's what I've been doing. Like I just didn't realize that that was that big of a thing. And then obviously there was the final 10 blow up where I exposed my entire game just because I was annoyed that Zap was like calling me a goat. And like I thought so much about that after the season and how I should have just, and like things I should have said instead of that. Like I wanted to say like, or I should have just not said anything really. Like it was not to my advantage to like dispel that perception that I was a goat, but I was just like I felt so emotional about it and wanting to defend myself that I sort of just blocked out all logic at that point. And then I think I also made the mistake of like telling Izzy basically all of my endgame plans at Final 8, and then telling Gold that all of my endgame plans too, and assuming they wouldn't like compare notes. So I think I overall played pretty well, but I had like a lot of mistakes riddled in between. Like I feel like I'm a good player that makes a lot of mistakes. That's sort of how I think of myself. Like in any given situation, I will probably make the right move, but there is a chance that I will just like completely flip out and make a terrible move, and I will think it's a good move because, yeah, I don't know. I just
Even when
sort
you
of
think about like even the final 10 itself, right? Like on the one hand, yes, like you expose things about your game that you didn't need to expose. And on the other hand, it's like really hard to stay quiet when you're in a situation where everyone is like commenting on your game the way that is. And also that like I'm sure some part of you is worrying like if I try to present my game only at FTC, like the jury might not believe me. So like I need to establish some credibility with the people who are here before they get to Ponderosa so that I have something established. So I completely understand the desire to do it. And, as you pointed out, like it didn't end up being one of the main reasons you were targeted after that, at least not quite a few of the places. So I don't know. I think it actually did work out better than we realized at the time that it happened for you.
Yeah, I don't think it was terrible. And at the time, I just sort of like blocked that out of my mind. Like, I don't want to ever think about this again. But then that made me like not think about the impact of it, which was, I don't think I should have done because it was a moment that had a large impact. I just didn't want to think it did. Like, yeah. But I forget what the original question was. I think I got pretty sidetracked.
What Elk said? You're talking?
No, what you said, like the question at the start.
Oh, it was what was your strategy going into the game, and can you compare and contrast it with how you actually played?
Oh, right. Well, I think I answered most of that.
Yeah, I think you did. It's actually interesting that you brought up the F10 tribal because that's where we were headed next. My question is, what was going through your head during the F10 tribal? Like all of it, but especially, you know what I'm about to say. Sheep Gang Rise Up when you dropped those infamous words, your FTC speech after Zap called you a goat.
Okay, so like going into the tribal, I was not super concerned. Like I knew that there had been 7 of us that had voted Alex the last tribal, so I was like, okay, it should just be a pretty easy vote on Chip. And I think I was actually the first one in the tribal chat to say I'll admit it, I voted for Chip. I did it because she didn't vote with us the last tribal, and Zap and Izzy are immune. Like, what's the big deal? And then I think that sort of started. I mean, the fighting was going to happen regardless of whether I said anything, but that was the thing that sort of pushed it over the top. And then people started fighting, and just so much drama. And I'm glad I wasn't in like completely involved in all of it because it just seemed pretty toxic. But I wasn't entirely sure when I jumped in again. I think it was when either Zap or Izzy was like, we should target like Tig, Shaun, or Gold to weaken L. And I was like, oh, why is my name being brought up? And then they were like, oh, because they were like, oh, you're sort of following L. And I think at one point Zap was like, the way things are going, L, Tig, and Shaun are going to go to the final 3 and L is going to win unanimously. And then that sort of set me off because I was like, that's not going to happen. Like I know that if L is going to win unanimously, I'm going to flip on him. Like I'm not a stupid player, like you know that. And then I think that was sort of what got to me. I felt underestimated and I felt like I wasn't being treated fairly. It was, I don't know. I felt like I needed to like stick up for myself even though I did so in sort of a questionable way. And when I was typing that whole speech, I don't even know what I was thinking. Like, I should have had something go off in my brain that says, wait, take a step back. This is not a good idea. You're exposing your entire game not just to Zap, which is already a bad idea, but to literally everyone else in the game, in the one channel you're supposed to speak in. Like, just, it's not a good move. And I just didn't realize that in time. And then, yeah, I just got super defensive, and then I was really emotional at that point. I was I was just taking everything super hard, and yeah, I don't know. And then the rest of the tribal, I think at one point Gold threw out my name because he was like, "Oh, Shaun said he's gonna play the middle. That means he's gonna like flip his way to the end, and like he has no loyalty to anyone." Which I think he was twisting my words a bit, but that was also my fault for telling people that I was playing the middle. But then it was funny. We were just able to talk about it so civilly in the midst of, I think, Chip and Lisa, who were just like fighting and like being really toxic. And like every 10 messages, Gold or I would like respond to each other, like, yeah, that's a good point. I completely understand that. And I feel like outside of the full FTC speech thing, I was pretty civil throughout the tribal, and yeah, but it and then I think toward the end I maybe said one or two more things about like correcting something that Izzy said. I think Izzy was like, "Oh, if Zap and I hadn't flipped, the duos would have like gone on to like be the majority and like steamroll the game." And I was like, "No, that's not true. Like I take an L and I would have flipped 2 at the final 12." And then I wasn't getting listened to, and then I was annoyed by that. But I think at that point the damage was already done. Like I should have realized that it was a bad idea like so many times, and I just didn't. And it ultimately ended up being overly emotional, and I don't think it was great for my game. Although, I mean, I think ironically it did make people realize that I was sort of a threat, but I didn't realize that's not. I mean, I know we don't want to be perceived as a threat, but I didn't think about that at that time. So it was it was sort of good for me, but also I feel like that would have been much more impactful to just say that at FTC, like reveal all my strategy there. So it was just a lot of emotions and not a lot of logic. And I was very grateful when it ended. And it was Tig who got voted out instead of me. Even though I really liked Tig and I didn't want him to go home, I knew I was the other person on the chopping block. So I was very thankful that it wasn't me.
Okay. That definitely provides some insight into what was going on. That shit was fucking crazy. Like, oh my god. Like literally, I mean, we talk about it all the time, but like I know like like Roman, I think had like literally like DM'd me and was like, "You have got to look at F10 Tribal right now. You've got to look." Like Shaun just like wrote an essay, like you have to see it, and I was like, "Oh my god!" And it's like just that amidst everything, and then just like also hearing like your general thoughts. It's like I don't know. It's just like puts everything into perspective, and yeah. Um,
Hearing what you said in there about, being glad that it was Megan, not you there, who ended up having to go into that fire. How do you think you would have held up if you had been sent into that fire against Zap? Do you think you could have made it competitive? Do you think you maybe even could have pulled off that fire if you were there in Tig's place? Or do you think that challenge was one that you would have really struggled with?
I think that particular challenge was one of my stronger suits. Like I've done a few ciphers before, I feel pretty confident in them. Do I think I could have beat Zap? Probably not. Like I'd give myself maybe like 20-25% odds. Like I it would have been awesome to have beaten Zap and have that be like a big move. Like I would have really liked that, but as I said before, I was very grateful that I didn't have to go into fire because I knew it was almost certainly going to go home.
you think you would almost certainly go home because of like challenge ability, or
Yeah, because I I feel like I also think I would have like choked under pressure because I was under a lot of stress at that tribal, and like
right?
I think it was the stakes would have been so high that I would have just like broken and not been able to be at my strongest. Like I think if I were at my strongest and like doing them for fun during like just like right now, like practicing, I think I maybe could have beaten that time. I mean, I don't know what the exact puzzle was, but I think I doubt that I would have been able to beat that time from Zap. And I mean, Tig did come close. Like, props to him for putting up a fight that challenge. But yeah, I don't I think I would have more than likely lost.
Makes sense. Yeah. It just like you said, like the amount of stress in general, and then, Zap being Zap. Like it's just like a lot going on at once, and always better someone else than you. Which reminds me of that iconic moment, like between you and Peanut, where it's like, I'm really glad, or I really hope it's you. And then you were like, me too. And it's like, oh, so you really hope it's you too. That was so good.
Oh, that was funny.
I was,
That tribal, I was like walking home from school and I wasn't expecting it to be for like anything weird to happen because I was like, oh, it's just going to be 5-2 against Peanut. Nothing bad is going to happen. And then I like saw my name came up and I was like, oh no, what is happening? This is very bad. And then I just came into tribal and Peanut was like, no worries, but I hope it's you. And I was like, oh no, is it going to actually be me? Like,
oh, that was,
I mean, I thought it was unlikely because I knew that like we had that 5-person alliance, but I also yeah, like that was the moment that sort of set off a lot of paranoia in me, and it led to me like distrusting Ginger and Gold because they I still don't know if it was Ginger who threw my name to Alex or if Alex threw my name to Ginger and Gold and they just agreed to say it, but like
I'm pretty sure it was Ginger and Gold.
oh, so they were actively throwing my name. Okay. But like that yeah, that started my paranoia spiral at that point. Not as big as like the paranoia that Alex would have always, but at that point I was like I DM'd Alex and was like, "Oh my god, why did I get votes? Like why did you vote for me? Like explain yourself, you criminal fool. Why did you vote for me?" And he was like, "Oh, 2 people told me to vote for you," but he didn't say who. And he was trying to be like all mysterious, like, "Oh, I don't want to expose who it was, but 2 people voted for me." And I was like, "Okay." I'm like 95% sure that's Ginger and Gold. But I was really scared because I thought everyone might have been in on it. But like I eventually decided to just like ask Zap and Elle about it and they were both on. Like I think Zap was like, "Oh, like that happened." And like Gold even threw out your name to us like beforehand. So like at that point, Zap and Elle both just threw Ginger and Gold under the bus, and I was super relieved because I I thought that like everyone might have been plotting against me, but it was really only Ginger and Gold who were like trying to be sneaky and whatever. But that was sort of a tangent.
That's okay. That's what this is for. We want to hear your thoughts. So that was great. Um, so we have definitely mentioned how a lot of your game was focused on playing the middle. So my question is like, how did you manage to do this? And also, I have to ask, what went into your decision to brag about it so often in DMs?
I think me bragging about it was a little bit exaggerated. I think I actually don't remember when I first bragged about it. I probably did it so casually, like I didn't think about it as this big thing. Like I wasn't going around every round telling people like, "Oh, I'm doing such a good job playing the middle. Like look at me, I'm so awesome."
That's what it
Like
sounded like.
I
Like
was
that's what people made it out to be.
I wasn't trying to do that, but it might have been like that. And like I think the start of me wanting to play the middle was sort of around the what was it? The team captains challenge where I was like, okay, these are probably going to be like the main sides. And at that point, I thought that like they picked me because they wanted me with them, but I learned later that they picked me because they wanted me out, and I was sort of sad. But I was able to like work my way into that group just through like I don't know. Just I constantly told like the dualition like, "Oh, I want to work with you guys. I want to go to the final 7. Like I want us to be the alliance." And even though there was never like an official 7-person alliance created, like I was I was able to be like sort of like adjacent to that group. Like I had both Zap and L at the start of Merge like telling me all the stuff from that 6-person alliance that was going on, which was honestly kind of funny because both of them thought that they were the only ones who were telling me the information there, and they were throwing each other under the bus to me. Like at one point, Elle said, like regarding the final 14, like, "Oh, I'm surprised Zap wasn't part of like Ginger and Gold throwing your name out." And Zap was also like, "Oh, I think like it was Elle and Gold's idea to make the duo alliance." And it was funny that they were both throwing each other under the bus to me because I was sort of able to know that there were cracks there, and like I was able that was sort of how I set myself up with the duo alliance, but then I also had bonds with the singles, like I had that singles club alliance with other Shaun and Malachi that we made early on, and I was like telling them most of the information that the duos were giving me just so they would trust me, and so they wouldn't really be scared that I was close to the duos, and it's more like, oh, Shaun is close to the duos and he's getting all this information from them, so we should keep him around because he's like feeding us all this information that we wouldn't be getting otherwise. And then I was also sort of close to like Lisa, not really though. And then like Chris was also someone I really wanted to work with. I was so disappointed when I ended up having to vote him out because like at the start of Merge, I essentially just came to him and was like, I feel like I'm on the bottom of this alliance that I've worked so hard to be in. Like I feel awful. Like I don't like the position that I'm in. And then we I feel like we would have worked together well because we were I mean, he sort of believed what I was saying, and I feel like he believed that I was like feeling really I was like done with working with the duos because they were like throwing my name out and using me as the decoy. And yeah, I feel like that was probably the best part of me playing the middle was like my relationship with Chris because like he fully believed that I was willing to flip on them, and I mean I was, but I was also still sort of working with them. And yeah, like the sort of the thing that exemplifies that my game in early merge was so good is that for the first three merge tribals, I was the only one to vote correctly for all three of them. Like I know Zap was like in the final 10 tribal, like, oh, voting record doesn't mean anything. Like no, so I've seen someone win without voting correctly a single time. But I still feel like that was sort of impressive. Like I was still on top of the information flow the whole time, and I think it was because even when I didn't vote with people, I would still let them know, oh, hey, like I gave Malachi, Shaun, and Lisa and Chip, I think, a heads up, and even Chris, that Chris was getting targeted by the duos. Like I said, Chris is getting targeted, we should make a move on Alex because I still wanted to make a move on Alex, and I actually didn't change my vote from Alex to Chris until literally the minute before votes were locked because like I was planning that with L, and then L was talking to Tig, and Tig was like, "No, that's a stupid idea," which it probably was. But I think the fact that that happened gave me more credibility with the singles than any of the duos because they were all hiding it from the singles. But I was like telling them that Chris might be getting votes, so like I feel like that helped me. That helped me like get the singles on board for the Ginger Snap vote, and then like keep those bonds with Malachi and Shaun so that they made sure my name wasn't on the chopping block at the final 11, even though I was originally the target of the Zap, Izzy, Chip, Alex group. Like I don't know, I know Malachi's was like, oh, I convinced them to target L instead of you. So I feel like that's sort of when me playing the middle was like the best. That was when it worked out the best for me. And then obviously after that, once I told everyone I was playing the middle, it sort of defeated the purpose. Like if everyone knows you're playing both sides, you're playing neither side. And that's just you're not really with anyone. No one trusts you at that point. But I feel like the bonds I had made were so strong that people still sort of trusted me after that, after they knew I was playing both sides. But that definitely took a hit. My game definitely took a hit from that, and I wasn't really able to ever fully recover. But at the beginning of Merge, I feel like I was playing one of the best games at that point. not.
Let's drill down a little further for a moment on those couple of votes right at the start of merge, specifically the 12 and 11, where you're going to end up being one of the only people, one of 4 people to vote correctly at those two, and as you said, including 13, the only one. Why is it from your perspective that the 4 of you, meaning you, EA, Shaun, Malachi, and Lisa, went from voting with Zap and Izzy to vote off Ginger, to voting against Zap and Izzy and voting off Alex? Like, what led to that swing? Was it all part of just trying to trim both sides to support playing the middle, or was there more to it than that?
I mean, I think like the reason we, or at least the reason I wanted to go after Ginger was because I was super scared that the Duo Alliance was just going to take control and like steamroll. And I knew, like, knowing now I know that that probably wasn't ever going to happen, but I really didn't want that to happen. So I based that round, I basically went to all the singles and was like, hey, we need to stop the duos from steamrolling, so let's vote out Ginger. And I think like sort of the perception of like the 4 of us being a tight knit group. It was more like three of them and then me on the outside of that because like I wasn't. I think there was a. I was reading from the alliance chat that like Zap, Izzy, Shaun, and Lisa had, and they were saying like, "Oh, Shaun, meaning me. Like, how does he know about the vote? How does he know that the vote is Ginger?" One of them was saying that, and I feel like I I don't know. Like I was sort of the 8 people that voted for Ginger, I was like on the bottom of that group. Like I mean, I didn't even know that Zap and Izzy were voting for Ginger. Like I thought it was going to tie. But so that was sort of what was happening going into there. And then at the final 11, the reason I targeted like the Alex, Chip, Zap and Izzy group, I think the reason that they ended up going home was just sort of because of distrust of like Zap and Zap's allies, and also additionally, like I was I knew I could never work with Alex because we were never really close, and we were sort of both in like the early merge and right before the merge, like we were both sort of adjacent to the duo alliance, and I sort of wanted to be as close to the people from the Duos Alliance as possible, but I guess that was more earlier. At the final 11, the reason I came after Alex was because I mean, I knew he threw my name out. And once I had heard that, I like once you throw my name out, like I will just come for you you like I will abandon all logic and I will just like be just like put all of my energy into getting you out. Like I think at the final 11, I wasn't really a swing vote there. That was more Shaun and Lisa. Like Gold, Tig, and L had sort of separately gotten both me and Malachi as allies as numbers for that vote. So I wasn't really a swing vote at that point. Like I had sort of re-solidified with their side because I never, even though I voted against them at the final 12, like I didn't like Tig and L both knew that I was doing that, and even Gold, I just sort of explained things to him and he was cool with it. So it was like the flip to Ginger, that was a temporary vote that I needed to do to break up the duo alliance, and once that sort of broke up, like I think it was fairly obvious which side I was going to when the side sort of reformed.
Okay. Sorry, I was just waiting to see if Elk was going to say anything. I wasn't looking at the podcast screen. But wow. I just I don't know. It's like so different hearing the game from your perspective versus like watching the game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Like my perspective was in some ways like fairly limited in the amount of information I was getting. Like I definitely like in compared to like Malachi, I don't think I was getting quite as much information, at least definitely later on. So I felt like I was building a big narrative based on like a limited amount of information. And so some of my reads might have been sort of incorrect, but that's just what I like to do. I like to, out of what I know, just like build a large narrative of like, oh, these are the sides, these are who might flip, like this is what's going to happen. Yeah.
Right. I feel like maybe just like because you were really set up like super well because of like playing in the middle, like especially like pre-merge is probably due to like being a single player with the duolition, but like towards the end you just like became someone that people just didn't trust. And honestly, like I think being aligned with Elle and Tig like fucked you. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, like, if I were to play it again, like this is going back more to pre-merge, but pre-merge I actually lost like a lot of people that I wanted to work with. Like I lost Mothgod obviously at the final 22. And then Sushi went out after that, and I knew he was inactive and not going to last too long, but I think I was like near the top of his trust rankings, if not number 1 at least for some of it. Like I wanted him as an ally, and then Logan, I mean, like everyone liked Logan. I wasn't alone in being Logan's ally, but I felt like I had like he trusted me a decent amount, and then like Saggy I also liked, and like I was losing at the beginning of like the beginning to middle of pre-merge, I was losing ally after ally after ally. And I felt like I had to sort of latch on to some people, so I just latched on to Zap and L, and I was like, I just sort of was like, please, like, let me work with you. Like at that point, I sort of lost my main other options, and yeah, and then moving. Wait, what was the question again? I got sidetracked.
Oh, you're okay. I think you answered most of it, or if not all of it. It was a lot of your game was focused on playing the middle. How did you manage to do this? And also what went into your decision to brag about it so often in DMs?
Oh, right. Yeah. Like I think the reason I played the middle was because I don't know, like I had the like I put so much work into the making sure the duolition was like trusted me, and then like I felt like I if that the side that sort of got wiped out before merge, like I feel like had I wanted to go with that group and like had Logan and Disc and those people not gotten voted out, like I feel like I could have sort of worked with them. Like I would have had to put in a lot of work, which I mean I did with the duolition. Like I wouldn't have been toward the top of there, but yeah, like I think I had one of my options sort of got cut off a lot, but then I was still able to sort of play the middle because of my bonds with Shaun and Malachi in that singles club alliance. And yeah, that's like I don't know. But then the I think when playing the middle really when that like really ended for me was the final 8 round, like at the start of that round, because of more emotions and more like being done with the final 10, because like Izzy had been so nice during that round. I was like, okay, I really want to work with Izzy now, because I don't exactly remember why, but I was dead set on working with Izzy, and I decided to like DM her and be like, "Hey, I hope you're feeling better about the final 10. Like, will you go to the final 4 with me? Like, I want to make a final 4 deal with you." And I just sort of did it out of nowhere, and I think she felt really like sort of surprised by that, and she was like, "Okay, sure, we can help each other to that position." Like, yeah. And then like Izzy then proceeded to for good reason. Like I wasn't very social with her before that, so she had no reason to trust me. She went to like Gold and was like, "Oh, we should vote out Shaun instead of Malachi," because I don't exactly remember why. But then Gold came to me later that final 8 round, and he was like, "Oh, Izzy's throwing your name out." And like I was going to do it, but then I decided to just ask you if like you had thrown my name out, which Izzy told me, and I was like, "Yeah, I did. I did throw your name out, Gold, but I can explain." And then I gave him some like BS explanation of like, "Oh, I was only doing it to keep Izzy satisfied because she wanted to do it," which was true, but I also didn't trust Gold. I sort of was just lying there, and then I thought that I had a Final Four deal with Gold that we were both going to honor because he had come to me with like this confidential information, like, oh, Izzy wants you out, but I don't want that to happen. But then I found out later that Gold and Izzy had talked about that, and they had been like, oh, Shaun is so cocky, he's offering multiple people Final Four deals. When I was like, in my mind, I thought that the Final Four deal I made with Izzy was like broken after she threw my name out and wanted to vote me out that round, but I guess I didn't like express that. And then Gold like spun it to have it seem like I was the one offering the Final Four deal to him instead of the other way around. And then like Izzy and Gold also made that was the time when everyone made their final three alliance with Shaun and Malachi. Like I was like the original one. Like I was the like that was my idea first, but then everyone else had that idea at like the final 8 to final 7. So I felt like because they had all those people wanting to work with them, they're like, "Oh, why should we work with Shaun? We have all these other options. Like let's do what's best for us, and maybe Shaun isn't the person we want to work with." So I think the reason I that ended up all backfiring is because Izzy, Gold, Shaun, and Malachi, and also L to an extent, all lost a lot of trust in me. So the like the wheels just started to fall off, and I pretty much lost all my agency at that point until after the rock draw, which is a whole nother story.
So you said until after the rock draw. So do you feel like you gained agency after the rock draw?
I mean, after the rock draw, I had the agency and the responsibility, and what I should have done if I wasn't stupid and played with my brain instead of my emotions, I should have voted Izzy out at the final 5 because obviously it was a massive mistake for me not to do that. But I feel like I did have the agency there. Like had I like gotten a brain and not been an idiot, I could have gone to Malachi because like the timeline for that round is basically right after the rock draw. Like I apologize to Izzy, and then we start talking, and then we just keep talking. We end up having this like 7 or 8 hour long conversation about both like game stuff and how like deceitful Gold is. Like I think every like 30 minutes she would just be like, "Oh, like I feel so betrayed by him. Like he's such a meanie. Like I don't like he's been like I don't remember what it was exactly, but it was like Gold. I put all my faith in him. Like she was like I wanted to go to the end with Gold, but now I can't do that. And I sort of felt I guess that was sort of like her charm working on me. Like I felt bad. I was I almost didn't I didn't want to have to vote Izzy out after how betrayed she felt. Like I don't know, maybe that was like her tactic or whatever, but like I didn't want to vote her out after that, even though she was telling me like, oh, it's your decision. And I think at that point I sort of came to the conclusion that both Izzy and Gold will beat me at the end. So it doesn't matter which one of them I vote off here, because I know I'll need to get the other one out later. Like at that point at the final 5 I thought Izzy and Gold would beat me, and then Malachi and Zap would be like 50-50 for me to go up against. Like that was my like threat level evaluation. So I think done if I had done the right thing with my agency, I would have gone to Malachi after Izzy had told me that Malachi was flipping and leaving me out of the vote and been like, "Hey, Malachi, you Izzy is telling me everything you're telling her to me, and she's saying that you want to flip, and I have also been telling her that I want to flip, but we should not flip. We should vote. We should vote Izzy out, because if we don't do that, then that's a major mistake, and we're probably going to have to face her in fire at 4, and we don't want to let Zap and Izzy any further." Like I had the agency to do that, and I think from what Malachi has said, he would have gone for that had I pushed for it, because it was the right move, and we just were too like blinded by emotion or whatever to see it. But like I feel like I had the agency there to get the vote on off of Gold and onto Izzy if I wanted to, but I just like because of how close Izzy and I had gotten, I just felt like the game reward from that was not outweighed enough by the like emotional toll of it. And That's sort of my thought process for the move, because I know that everyone was like, "Oh, that was a terrible move. Why would you ever think of doing it?" Like I know it was like the worst move of the season or whatever, but it was like a half and half of emotion, and also like I think it was an emotional reason for me to want to make the move, but then my justification for it was like, "Oh, gold is also a threat, so I can't beat him anyway, so why not just vote out someone I can't beat and keep Izzy, who I want to talk to and is really cool." But obviously that turned out to be a major mistake.
Right. It's interesting that we slipped down that path of discussion, because my next question was literally what the fuck was going through your mind at F5 and F4. So I don't know if you have like more thoughts on that, but
I mean, I can touch on Final Four.
yeah.
At that point, I was thinking through all the possible Final Threes. I was like, okay, I could go to Final Three. If we vote Izzy out, this was before Zap had transferred her immunity over. Like, if we vote Izzy out, it'll be me, Zap, and Malachi at the end. And I think that Zap will take Malachi to the end. And I wasn't sure who Malachi would take to the end, but I also knew he wasn't as likely to win the final immunity, because I basically was just thinking, if Zap is in the final three, it needs to be in her best interest to take me to the end, or else she will not take me to the end. Like, or else I will not get to the end, because I wasn't going to put myself in a situation where I had to beat Zap, like, or just had to win final immunity in general. Like, part of the reason why I didn't want to vote Zap after she had transferred her immunity was because even if by some miracle Malachi and I both voted Zap and it went to Fire, and Malachi beat Zap in Fire, then even still I would have needed to beat Izzy in final immunity at least. And I don't like, if Izzy had won final immunity, she would go to the end and win. And if Malachi or I had won, we would have taken each other. And again, I think it would have been sort of a toss up. Although Malachi thought that he would beat me handily. So I'm really not sure how that final two would have gone. But I didn't want to put myself into a position where I would have been forced to win final immunity to make it to the end, because I know that I'm prone to choke in those situations. And on the final immunity challenge, I did choke. Like, I got a 58-minute time compared to like 32 and 33 minutes. So had Zap gone out in Fire that round, and had the immunity challenge results been the same, Izzy would have won final immunity. And had she taken me or not, I would have gotten either Malachi or I would have gotten swept at the end. So like, I think I made my Final Four decision because I felt like it was in Zap's best interest to take me to the end, because I mean, in a strictly like chances of winning sense, it definitely was. Like, Izzy was almost certainly going to beat Zap, and like Zap was telling me this, or she was agreeing with what I was saying. Like, I was like, "Hey, we know Izzy's a big threat," and Zap was like, "Yeah, she's gonna sweep both of us." And I think the thing she said that really convinced me that she was taking me to the final two was made a comment that was like, "Oh, if it's a final three with the three, me, like Zap, Shaun, Izzy, like Izzy will just steamroll us and we'll just be standing there like, oh no, we're gonna lose." So when she said that, I was like, okay, so that means you're gonna vote out Izzy out. You're gonna vote Izzy out at three, right? But I never got that like confirmation. And looking back, I should have like realized that her not committing was her saying, basically implying, "I'm not taking you to the end. I'm taking Izzy, even though I think she'll beat me. Like, I'm still going to stay loyal." Like, I should have realized that, but I didn't in time, and that's sort of what led to my decision to vote Malachi at the final four. And I guess more rationale for my final five move was that I knew that Izzy was going to target Malachi at four because she was much closer to me and Zap. So I knew that if I voted out Gold at five, I was basically guaranteed final three, in a situation where it would have been in everyone's best interest to take me to the end. Whether or not they were actually going to do that, I judged that incorrectly, but I was putting myself in a situation where I was like, I didn't want to leave I didn't want to be the one who had to win the challenge to win the game. Like I didn't want to be in that position because I've said, like I will choke, I will mess that up. I will find some way to screw that up for myself. So I didn't want to put myself in that position. That's ultimately why I decided to vote off Gold at 5 and Malachi at 4. It was so I could be in that situation where Zap would take me to the end, which I feel like I could have gone about that better. Like looking back, I think my best case scenario from Final 5 onward is to vote off Izzy at 5 and then vote off Malachi at 4, like get Gold to do that and force fire against Malachi, because I know that at the final 3, Zap would take me to the end over Gold, and because Zap and Gold weren't close, like Zap and Izzy were close, Zap would have no reason to take Gold if she knew that Gold was a bigger threat. So that was my best way of getting to the final 2, but I didn't realize that in time. Like I think from like the standpoint I was looking at it, it was like a great move for me, and it was like, oh, the jury's not going to say that this is a great move, but like this is like an underrated genius way to like move through the end game. But it turned out to just be as stupid as it seemed. Like it was just it was as stupid as it seemed, and I just didn't realize that. But in my mind, there was a lot of justification for the moves that I made there. But obviously, it was justification based on like incorrect reads.
I mean, like, given the information that you had in the game at the time, like, that makes sense because all that you can do is make moves based on the information that you have. And it's easy for us to sit in an audience and say, like, that's a stupid move, that's a bad move, that's the worst move, like, because we have a lot more information than you do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like I knew that even if it had worked out, the jury was still going to be like, what the hell? Why did you not vote out Izzy when you had the chance to?
Mhm.
I mean, part of me wanted to say, like, why did you guys not vote out Izzy at final 8 or 7 or 6?
Mhm.
And now you're mad at voting her out at 5 when you had a bunch of other opportunities to do that. So, like, there was that. But also, I feel like had that paid off and had I been taken to the final 2 by Zap, I think I could have, like, explained that well at the end, but I'm not sure if the jury would have respected it just because of how stupid it looked on the surface, and I'm not sure if they would have been able to overlook that. Like, I mean, obviously, so much is different if Zap actually did take me to the end, because then that would just, I don't know, like, that's not what happened. Like, that would have meant that Zap and Izzy didn't have that close a relationship, and, like, who knows what would have changed if they weren't as close. But yeah, I feel like I thought in my mind, had it worked out, I probably would have been able to explain myself well enough, and I felt like I had a decent shot at beating Zap. I mean, I don't think I really did, but I knew it was way better of a chance at beating Zap than like Izzy or Gold. So yeah.
I agree. I think it would have been close at least. You know, I think you could have sold yourself at least. That sounds really terrible out of context, but anyway, moving on. A couple questions left. So, what did you think the reaction was going to be to your game, and what was it like when you saw what the reaction actually was?
Well, though I felt like I had a thought in my mind where I was like, okay, my game is going to be people are going to be like, my game is going to be pretty decent. So I was like trying to place myself on like the character and player rankings. I was like, okay, I'm probably going to be like 5 or 6 on player rankings. Like I wasn't one of the best, but I was pretty good, and I came so close to the end. And I honestly thought of myself as a pretty boring character, which I know I was in like the first few episodes. Like I wasn't all that interesting, but I didn't really see how the moves, like the final 10 tribal and all that stuff had like translated to being an entertaining character. So when like I was getting like your favorite award and like all the like I was so high in character rankings, I was like, oh, this wasn't intentional. Like I wasn't playing a character at all. It was just all like raw emotion and all like just my like own self and my own emotional like decisions that it gotten like that had created this character, which was probably entertaining to watch. But I was not at all expecting that. So when that happened, I was so shocked. I was like, oh my God, like how is this possible? Like this doesn't seem right. Like, did you make a mistake? Did you mean the other Shaun? Like, yeah, but I thought that people would see me in a slightly more strategic light, which I mean, maybe they would have if like I hadn't made that dumb of a move at Final Five. Like I feel like that sort of reinforced people's opinions that I wasn't that good of a game player because that was a terrible move and my game wasn't super like it didn't have a lot of super obvious good moves before that. But I still was I expected to be perceived as a better player and as a much worse character than how I actually ended up being perceived. But I feel like knowing what I know now, it was all pretty accurate.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. Okay, so I guess like a follow-up question is you expected to be perceived as a better player than you actually were. So does that mean that like you felt like you played a better game than what you did? I don't mean that in a mean way, just like I don't know how else to phrase that.
I mean, yeah, I get it. Like I thought I had played a more solid game. Like I didn't realize like I sort of knew that the final like 8, 7, 6 rounds were all bad. But I didn't know any of like the weaknesses that I had in pre-merge because I just never really went to
Yeah.
tribal. Like I had no idea that I was the that I like gold picked me at the final 16 to vote me off. Like when Zap had said that in the final 10 tribal, I mean that was the first time I'd ever even considered that possibility. I was like I didn't realize I was sort of on the bottom pre-merge and I had like I assumed that I had been playing as well as I had been at the early merge sort of the whole time, save for maybe those couple final 7, final 6 rounds when I was getting left out of votes and plotted against and not really having any agency. But I think I because I assumed that I was playing at my best the whole time, I thought like, oh, people are going to be like, oh, he was playing the middle and doing a good job and made good moves. They just didn't quite work out. But the perception was, oh, he was a decent player, but he made a lot of bad moves. And I wasn't expecting it, but like the only reason I wasn't expecting that was because I hadn't like looked back on my game through a more critical light, which I guess was hard to do without like I wasn't going to suddenly doubt my game while I was still playing it. Like I needed to hear that the moves were bad before I could like think before I could like what I'm trying to say is like I needed to hear others like critique my game before I realized the weaknesses it had,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Absolutely. I really one thing that I like appreciate is how receptive you've been to critique. I wouldn't even call it criticism because I don't think it's like criticism, not that criticism is bad necessarily, but you've really been open to hearing, where things may have went wrong in your game. I do still think that you are a little bit too hard on yourself sometimes because there are things to be celebrated within your game and things that really went well. And you have admitted that you have had agency within the game sometimes, but I do feel like overall you are a little bit harder on yourself and maybe is accurate. But this is an org where, and this season especially had a lot of commentary. So I can see how like reading all of that and just having a lot of like critical commentary would kind of affect your perception. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents. But let me see what my next question is. I'm pretty sure, yeah. So these are moving into the questions that I always ask. So these are the more vague questions, the less game-specific questions. So to start, do you still talk to anyone from your season?
The only person I've talked to after the season has been Izzy. We DM'd a couple times, and she invited me to a server that I might play in because she was telling me that I would like be a good fit for that server and that like she was a host there. But aside from that, I haven't talked to anyone, not because like I don't like the people or I'm like salty. It's just that's not usually a thing I do after orgs. I don't usually talk with people, so that's just yeah.
Okay. Yeah, definitely not like that isn't uncommon, I guess is what I was gonna say. And we noticed that you're still active around the server, which is this season honestly has the most engagement from players, alumni now, I guess, which is just so nice to have. We love you guys all so much, which this was such an amazing cast, so we're very fortunate. So now a little bit of a heavier question. Can you talk on mental health during the game? I know that at one point, or maybe even a couple of points, you even were crying because of how intense the game was. So I'm really curious to hear your take on mental health.
I think that was during the final 10 tribal where I was crying
Yeah.
once or twice. But aside from that, I think it was I didn't take anything too personally, and I my mental health was just good throughout the season. Like there was nothing that happened where I would be like that would be super upsetting. I think actually the aside from that tribal, the second worst thing was like right after I got voted out, like the in Ponderosa, when like Elle was grilling me about like why did you do this? Why did you do that? And I was just super overwhelmed, and I was like, oh no, I've been playing terribly, and like I think it was actually like slightly before I got to Ponderosa, like when Zap like told me she was going to vote me out, and I was super upset because of that. And then I wrote in my final words like, jury, please don't be mean to me, like I'm already mad enough at myself, like. And I think some jurors have said that like they didn't go as hard on me because I said that, but at that point that was probably the other bad time where I was just really upset that I didn't make the end, and also hard on myself for not making the end because I felt like I should have, even though that doesn't really make any sense. Like, I have no obligation to make it to the end, but because in my mind I sort of felt like I'm main character, because like you do feel like you're the main character when you are playing. So, like, I felt like I was letting myself down, and that was hard to bear. But aside from that and the final 10 tribal where that was just super emotional, and I got for some reason the things that Zach were saying, which were really not that bad, like they were a little out of line, but nothing compared to like the things that other people were saying. Like the disputes between like Zap and Elle and Chip and Lisa, like it wasn't anything compared to that. But that was just sort of the whole pressure of the tribal. But aside from those two moments, it was I dealt with things pretty well.
It's good to hear that you managed in a season that was definitely difficult, and intense overall, because I can't imagine, like, I know I would have cracked under pressure in this game. I probably would have quit. So it's admirable that all of you managed to, make it through. And it sounds like most of you had fun, which is great. So love that. Finally, have you ever played like any smaller orgs?
I've played I've played some smaller ones with like servers like 50 to 200 people. This is by far the biggest one I've played. So I've a lot of experience with smaller ones.
Gotcha. So my final question is playing a large org or a more popular org, you know, different from playing smaller or lesser known orgs? And if so, in what way or ways?
I think there's the biggest difference is like in the smaller orgs, there's just so many players that are like sort of inactive along for the ride, not really taking it as seriously. Like the first org I played, there were 5 people that struck out through the course of the season, and there was 1 person that quit. So it was like, it was funny. My elimination was sandwiched between 2 strikeouts on either side of it. So like, there was just like the smaller orgs I've played, there's just been people who strike out left and right, like self-vote all the time, and really just aren't that invested. Like I would, like one of the orgs I played, I would message people, like I would message like 1 or 2 people, like 3 messages a day, and that was it. Like I was really not invested. But this one, like everyone is super invested in the game, and like everyone wants to talk like all the time, and like I feel like me not talking all the time was sort of what led to just what, like the social game that I had this season in this one of the smaller orgs would have been fine, but it was because this season had such high expectations for how social you had to be that it just sort of caught me by surprise. But yeah, this org just had a lot more like a lot more engaged and like strategically savvy cast. I think that's the main difference.
Yeah, that's feedback that we receive a lot. You know, well, interestingly enough, we've actually seen people in confessionals also say like for like an org that has 1,000 people in it, I would expect people to not be so inactive, and like we've had that in the past. So it's interesting to hear that, and then also like your feedback where it's like super socially demanding like at the same time. But one thing that is always apparent is that our casts are very, very strategically demanding. And strategically savvy. So it's always a competitive cast, and every season just gets more and more competitive and more intense. So that's just interesting that you bring that up because it's something that we also see. So now is whenever we move into Elk's segments, and then afterwards we will open it up to questions from the audience.
All right, so we have a couple of segments we like to do at the end of these interviews where we have a couple of categories that we ask you for a couple things in to give a little bit more of a broad perspective on a couple things from the season. And first up, we're going to have you name about 2 to 3 players other than the winner of the season, Izzy, who you were particularly impressed by their play over the course of this season.
I definitely would have said Izzy if you had let me say her because she was just so awesome. But let's see. I wasn't impressed by too many people. I don't mean that in like a bad way, like oh people were like not that great, but I was sort of expecting people to be super like awesome. I don't know. I think Shaun, the other Shaun, I was especially impressed by him, like with the move at Final Six. Like that was just like so genius. And I had thought of a similar move to that. Like I know this is like the final segment, but just a small bit of back into the game. Like I wanted to get Gold and Malachi to like put R3 votes on Shaun because I felt like if he was likely to flip, like Izzy might not have gone to rocks for him, and if he hadn't flipped, it would have been a 3-2-1, and then we would have guaranteed ourselves a spot in the final 3. But like that was sort of a move that I thought about in my confessionals, and I was like, "There's no way someone would actually be able to pull this off." And then when he was actually trying to pull off a similar move to like take me out and get to the like sort of strong arm Golden Malachi into getting that final 3 he wanted, I was like, on one hand scared for my game, and on the other hand like super impressed. Like that was super impressive. And then like seeing how much agency he had and how well he was able to, like, he played the game I really wanted to play. Like, he was playing the middle, but he didn't go around and tell everyone that, and no one really realized. So I was really impressed by Shaun. And I'd also say Malachi, because I mean, during the game, I didn't think as highly of Malachi, but like I'm realizing now that like he had so much information. Like he was like everyone like trusted him. He had so many people coming up to him and being like, I want to go to the end with you. And that's just like super crazy. Like again, like Malachi played like the game I almost wanted to play, but I was too visible to play like that. So I think Shaun and Malachi were the two people I was most impressed by. And also maybe Logan, just because he was just the ability to capture so many people in with his social ability. And I feel like had he not gotten sniped with that specific collection of people at that specific tribal with like that sunset advantage, like just the circumstances had to line up perfectly for him to get voted out. Like, yeah, those were the Shaun, Malachi, and Logan. Three people I was
Right.
most impressed
Moving from there, we've got another set of 2 to 3 people from your season who you especially enjoyed getting to play with as personalities and characters in the season.
personalities, characters. Am I allowed to say Izzy for this one?
Sure.
I will. Well, I definitely would say Izzy because we got like so close after the final five. Like she was just so fun to talk to. She was so funny. Like all of the pictures that she sent were so awesome, and she was. Yeah, I really just like enjoyed talking to her, and also like Tig. Like we like besides that one conversation with Izzy, like Take was the person I enjoyed talking to the most because like we were both minors and that was sort of a running joke. Like sometimes I'd be like, "Oh my god, we're the only minors here. Like we're playing with a bunch of adults. Like that's so crazy." And then like he was just really funny throughout the season. I really enjoyed him. And then who else would I say is a character enjoyed? I mean, L was also great. He was just sort of his over the top nature and like the way he would like those weave his narratives was just so entertaining to see. Like he was just like really entertaining to watch, like sort of blow up in those tribals. Like even if I didn't fully agree with what he was saying, like it was just entertaining for me to watch.
All right, and then we've got one more of our little segments here where we talk about 3 moments from the season. Looking back on it, we want one moment that surprised you, one moment that made you happy, and one moment that made you laugh this season.
Okay, one moment that surprised. I think Final Six, when Gold, Malachi, and Shaun all actually went to Rocks, was what surprised me the most because I was like, there's no way these people are going to Rocks when they literally have a Final Three deal, and literally all they have to do is choose one of me or Izzy to vote out, and then vote out the other two of us next. Like, they have a pretty easy route to Final Three, assuming they can beat Zap and Immunity. Like, I was like shocked that they just almost and go for Golden Malachi was almost immediately. They just went into like we're going to Rocks. It was like no, so what are you doing? Like if I had not been a player, if my neck had not been on the line, I really would have been like, that's such a stupid move. Like they should have voted me out. Like I should have gone home. I was just so surprised by that. Like, yeah. And then happy moments. I'm I think after that tribal when I was just talking to Izzy and we had such a great conversation, that just made me feel really happy because I was at that point I was sort of losing motivation and then just that conversation just gave me the strength to like keep going and like we made a lot of like analogies and jokes and like those were fun and that just that whole just talking with Izzy throughout the last few days of the game was I don't know if that's one moment but that was really made me really happy. And then something that made me laugh. I'm not really sure because I feel like if I hadn't been me at the Final 10 Tribal, if that had been someone else, that would have made me laugh. Like, if I had not been the one doing that. Trying to think. I think the moment that made me laugh the most was at the merge when Zap and L were both like at the very exact same time throwing each other under the bus, throwing each other and Ginger and Gold under the bus to me. Like they both were like convinced that they were the ones keeping me in the loop and that I would trust them, and they were both doing it at the same time. And I was just like, this is so funny because they have no idea that the other's doing it. Like that was the funniest moment for me.
All right, thank you for those.
So now that we have completed the segments portion, we will turn it over to the audience that is listening in to see if they have any questions for Shaun. We will give it just a few seconds. Big, you do always get screen time per character. It's because you picked up like all of that French energy while you were in France. Looks like Malachi is typing, so we'll give it a second. While we wait for any questions to come in, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us, Shaun. It has been so lovely tonight, and I know that we're not done yet, but it's such a joy to get to speak to you and hear you talk about your game, and especially being such a big fan, perhaps the biggest fan, the biggest Shaun sheep, dare I say. Just getting to really hear your perspective on everything was really insightful and really helped me see things in a way that maybe I wouldn't have gotten to see otherwise. So that was really just a good time, and I appreciate you for sitting down with us tonight.
Yeah, I've just found this really nice because I've been able to talk and sort of I figured I don't know, I was even able to have a couple discoveries like that I didn't even realize before this podcast. Like I just talking about it has helped. Okay, I see Malachi
Mhm.
has posted a question.
Yeah, so Malachi asks, Shaun, in the end portion of the game, most noticeably Final 8 through Final 6, why do you think you lost agency with people, and how could you have prevented this from happening?
Okay, that's a good question. I think well, one reason was obviously just my blow up in that tribal, like, and laying out my entire game. I think that lost me a lot of trust with people because, like, I felt like I was sort of reliable before, like I was reliable, consistent. You could count on me to tell you information for stuff. But then that just sort of ruined my reputation. Like now I'm this middle player who's been playing everyone all along, and Shaun doesn't trust any. Shaun has no real allegiances. Like, oh, now all of a sudden I feel like that was a big part of it. And then I also lost agency because, like when Izzy like I came to Izzy and promised her the Final Four deal, and then that didn't work. And then when Gold told me that Izzy wasn't willing to work with me, I just sort of blindly trusted what Gold said. And from that point on, I felt like I just sort of confined myself to just following Gold, whatever he said at that point, because he sort of he told me what I wanted to hear. Like, I feel like I didn't at that point I think I lost agency because I closed the door to Izzy for those few rounds, and I didn't like because I'd had those conversations with Izzy and Gold and not really thought about their consequences. Then like literally everyone else at that point was talking about how I was making Final Four deals with people. And then like even though I think I told Malachi and Shaun everything I knew that was happening, I still they were still sort of sketched out by it. my Shaun shenanigans, as Malachi would say. Like, yeah, but I think my Shaun shenanigans from those couple rounds were what lost me the agency that I mean, I ultimately didn't really need to have it because I was able to get back into a good spot at Final 5, but I easily could have gone home at Final 6. Like that would have been the consequence of me losing agency. But I overcame that, but then I threw it back right away, right after that by putting out gold at Final 5. But that's my answer, Malachi.
Great. It doesn't look like there's any other questions, so we will go ahead and wrap up here. Once again, I want to thank you so much, Shaun, for meeting with us tonight. It has once again been such a pleasure, and we're just so happy to have you as part of the Villain Fiber family now. I feel like that sounds so fake, but I'm being so genuine. Everyone stick around. I know it's 2 a.m. EST, but like we will be interviewing Alex next. Lots of interviews tonight. So stick around for that. And yeah, so other than that, we have Viber Season 9, Second Chances, coming up on the 28th. So that will be very exciting. It's our first full returnee season. And maybe, who knows, like Shaun will be on the season. Like, I'm not saying he will or he will not, but you might be able to catch him on it. So that is something to look out for. And other than that, you can catch this podcast usually on Fridays. And we'll see you later. I've been Ashley, and our guest today is Ben.
Shaun.
And my co-host.
It's been out.
Great. I will catch you guys later. Bye.